tusentals brittiska flickor utsattes systematiskt för övergrepp av främst muslimska män från Östafrika, Pakistan och Mellanöstern. I årtionden valde polis och myndigheter att se åt ett annat håll av rädsla för att anklagas för rasism. Fiona Goddard är en av de överlevande av de så kallade grooming-gäng-skandalerna, ett av de mest uppmärksammade och mörklagda övergreppsfallen i modern brittisk historia. Idag berättar Fiona om sina erfarenheter till Riks.
So, my name's Fiona Goddard. I'm a survivor of child sexual exploitation, and I campaign and advocate for change within the systems, and we're in the process of also opening up a charity. So we're doing a lot of work and helping a lot of survivors of similar crimes at the moment.
Who were you before this happened?
So when I was 13, I was a victim of a gang of men that sexually exploited, tortured and trafficked me around England. I was abused for about 5 years, all in all. And that was between the years of 2008 and 2012. I finally got some justice in 2019, but the services at the time enabled and facilitated the abuse, basically. They turned a blind eye. They did not want to deal with it. They blamed the girls, and they moved the girls around locations where they ended up then getting exploited by more gangs of men. So it's been a long fight to get to where I am from where I was. I got put into a children's home under the care of social services, and the children's home they put me in it had a long history of being targeted by these men. It was well known. They'd even done a documentary 4 years before that, in 2004, about it happening to another girl. I was already highlighted as extremely vulnerable to this kind of thing when they placed me there. The men, as soon as you left the doors of the children's home, they'd pull up in cars, they'd block the roads and block the streets so you couldn't walk past, try and encourage you into the car and bribe you into the car. The first night it started for me and another girl at the children's home, we'd left and we'd got some vodka, and we were being a bit rebellious, and we'd had a drink of, we'd started walking down into the town centre, and there was a man there, and we asked him for a lighter, and he said he didn't have one, but he could take us to the shop to buy one. And this man, I knew him from the area that I grew up on. He'd sold clothes around the area, so we felt a little bit more reassured. We made the grave mistake of getting into the car. To start off with, nothing actually happened initially. That's because they call them grooming gangs. So there's a grooming process where they lure you in. There's a lot of coercion. So they'll be really nice to you, love bomb you, make you feel really special. And these are 12, 13, 14-year-old girls, and the men are between 25 and 40. He used to buy us stuff and act like a friend, and then one night he said he wanted to take us to a hotel instead of driving around, and that night in the hotel he got us both that drunk that we were basically unconscious, and he sexually assaulted me, and that was the first time anything bad had happened. But by that point we were already quite deep in it and didn't really know how to get out because of the whole grooming process that happened before that.
When did you first realize that what you were going through wasn't just something that happened, but actually grooming and abuse?
I think, so I reached out quite a few times to the services. When they've done a serious case review, there were 7 instances of serious assault, sexual assault or rape that I had reported to care home staff or police forces that they just never investigated. They blamed me for it instead. So when I think I realised initially that there was something up, but the more I reached out to the services that were supposed to protect me, the more they blamed me, and it basically reinforced what these men were saying to me. So I put up with it for a while. The longer that I was exposed to him, the more obvious it became. They'd start getting me to bring my friends out with me, and I then found out that they'd been contacting these other girls in private as well. And these were all 13, 14-year-old girls as well. And they'd been taking them out. Whereas they'd said to me that I was just special, that I was really grown up for my age. And what they'd done was they'd spoke to me about what I was lacking in my life. So because I was in a children's home, I was craving a family unit, somewhere to feel safe, somewhere to belong. So they offered me that. They said I was part of their family, that I was special, that they were going to look after me, they would keep me safe, and offered me everything that I was lacking from my home environment. And then when I noticed they were doing the same things to these other girls, I started questioning things. But as things went on, it went from being coercive to quite violent, and they would show videos of them beating people to death, or tell me this is where we dump dead bodies, and then dead bodies would be found there. There were 2 stabbings and a shootout. There was a lot of stuff that made me extremely fearful. There was an illegal immigrant that had been castrated in Pakistan, fled to the Philippines, was wanted by firing squad in the Philippines for abusing women and children there, and had fled to the UK on the back of a van. And then he was sneaking into the bedroom and sexually assaulting me and another girl, and we were just terrified because this man literally had done all sorts in different countries, and no one even knew he was in that country. So there was a lot of intimidation, so I couldn't just speak up. And when I did try to speak up, I got beaten quite badly. I've had broken nose multiple times. I've had ligament knocked off my cheekbone, both my eyes swollen shut, broken ribs, all sorts of stuff. My head's cut open. I've been black and blue from head to toe before. So I started looking at stuff around the house, because I basically, by this point, I lived with these men. So at like 16-year-old, I was living in this house with all these fully grown men in a bedroom. There was no like bedding on the bed or anything. It was just a bed in the corner of a bedroom, and I basically lived in there. And I started looking at stuff around the house for their real names, because they'd all used fake names. So I seen the passports and the letters, and I just stored the names in the back of my head. The houses they took me to, I stored the addresses. So by the time I turned 18, when this all started stopping, I was basically too old for them. They weren't interested anymore, and I managed to move myself away from it. And I started fighting straight away from 2013, like a year after I got away, for it to be abused, and it wasn't taken seriously. It was covered over. I told police officers I'd been raped by hundreds of men from the age of 12, and they failed to submit intel and everything. So I exposed them all onto the news channel in England with my care records, where it had it documented what had happened to me since 2008. So they started an investigation in 2014, and it went to court in 2019, and 9 men were found guilty of 22 offences of child sexual abuse, including rape and child prostitution, against me, and they were sentenced to 132.5 years, which in England is actually a big sentence. We don't normally get big sentences over here, but they got between like 16 and 20 years each.
And these men, which countries was they from?
So they were either like first generation or second generation Pakistani immigrants. They were from Mirpur in Kashmir. They had tried getting me to sign myself out of the care of the social workers so they could take me to Kashmir. Luckily that didn't play out, because I don't think I would be here today if it did.
Now you and another survivor, Jamie Leigh Jones, have started an organization to support the women who been through similar experiences. How did that idea come about?
So because of the type of abuse that we experienced, it included them taking us away from school, family networks, and it basically put a standstill on our lives to the point where we couldn't progress as adults because we'd had all the opportunities taken from us as children. And we noticed that it was triggering trauma cycles for the victims, that they were just going over and over in these cycles of abuse, and not really having any future, so to speak. So we wanted to try and address that issue with looking at education within the school systems and public sectors like the police forces to try and change the response to these crimes. We also wanted to look at counselling for the victims to try and get them in a position where they could process and cope with what happened to them. And then we were also looking at group sessions which would tackle issues like skills they'd missed out on, such as budgeting money, cooking, maths, English, to try get them into a position where they could move on from what had happened to them, so they weren't defined by the type of abuse that they had. Because this type of abuse, it isn't like a one-off rape or anything like that. I was raped by over 50 men by the time I was 17. I had everything stripped from me. I was treated worse than an animal at points, sleeping on a mattress on the floor in a dirty room. So it doesn't just take away your opportunities, but it takes away your personality as well, and makes you feel like you're less than what you are. So it's about rebuilding these people so they can go on to be successful people and have good lives. The police forces, the schools, the social workers, the care home staff, they basically enabled this type of abuse. So they placed vulnerable girls into homes where they knew men were targeting them. They even paid for the girls to be put in hotels that they knew were being used by these gangs to rape young girls. So they used taxpayers' money to pay for girls to be raped in these hotels, basically. They would call the girls prostitutes. Some of the girls got locked up in secure units instead of the men that were raping them. They were saying to the girls that it was their own faults, that they deserved it. They intentionally covered over complaints about rape and sexual assault and ignored them. So I got pregnant at 15-year-old while I was living in the children's home to another boy from the children's home that was 18 at the time. They covered over that I got pregnant by him, even though they did a DNA test. Then they took my daughter from me because they said that I was being abused by a paedophile ring and it wasn't the right environment for a child. They refused to remove me, and when I asked them to move me and my daughter to a different city away from these men, they said it was too much funding to waste on someone like me. So they intentionally left us in these positions where they wouldn't report stuff. I turned up back at the children's home one day with blood all down my legs, strangulation marks around my neck, restraint marks on my arms, and bruising up and down my spine. And I was crying and told them I'd been raped. They asked me if I wanted them to ring the police. I mean, I just ran off to my room and said I want to be alone because I was traumatised. And they never reported it to the police. They never made a phone call to the police. They never got me any medical attention. They didn't do anything. At 14, I'd been spiked and I'd had a fit. I'd vomited all in my hair, and I went back to the children's home and I told them what had happened. They told me I was an attention seeker, and I ended up going and laying on my bed, and I couldn't move for about 3 days. I couldn't get out of the bed. They even tried getting me arrested during that period for breaking a mirror in my bedroom the week before. And the police officer said she couldn't arrest me because in the condition I was in, and that they needed to seek some medical attention from me. And they still didn't get me any medical attention. They left me unable to move for 3 days at 14-year-old. And these were care home staff and social workers that were leaving children in them conditions. So there was so much, like, they actually knew and they didn't do anything about it. It wasn't a case of a misunderstanding. They were scared to mention what was going on because of the ethnicity of the perpetrators. So a documentary was due to be released in 2004 before I was even abused, and it was in my care home following a victim of grooming gangs and their social worker. The Chief Crime Commissioner for West Yorkshire, where I live, had said to the people that produced the documentary for them not to air it because it may upset racial tensions within the community so soon after the 2001 Bradford riots, which was riots between the Pakistani community and the white community. So they covered it up out of fear of riots and fear of racism, basically. They didn't want to be called racist. My mum once tried reporting me missing, and the police officer, she just said I'd been picked up by an older Asian male and I was only 15, and the police officer said she wasn't allowed to describe him as that because it was racist and she should just be glad that I'm being taught a different culture.
And if you had the chance to speak directly to politicians and social workers or police officers now, what would you want them to understand?
So I actually do work with the politicians and the police forces and the charities, and I help people understand what happened and what went wrong. So we've had a lot of stuff changed. They're no longer allowed to refer to a child as a prostitute because a child cannot be a prostitute. Do you know what I mean? So we've got that changed. A lot of the terminology's changed. We have made some changes within the child sexual exploitation units on how they respond, but it's not there yet. This is why we need the inquiry, so we can go into depth at what went wrong and really make real change within the systems. My children's homes that I was in have all been closed down, every single one of them. I was in 3 children's homes and 2 semi-independent assisted livings, and all of them were closed down because of what was happening to me and hundreds of girls in them buildings. And we have made some change. There's still a lot of people that don't understand what happened though, and it's about educating as much as we can, educating people on the grooming process. I always say safeguarding children starts with a community, because you are responsible of reporting something wrong if you see something wrong. These people can't report what they see wrong if they don't understand that it's wrong. And after the services for so long enabling this type of behaviour, the whole community even turned against these girls and didn't understand it was wrong. If they saw a 30-year-old man with a 13-year-old girl in the car, the communities would be calling the child names, not the men, because the services had told them that it was these girls' fault, that they were making lifestyle choices. So there's a lot of damage to undo and to relearn people that actually a 30-year-old man should not be going anywhere near a 12, 13-year-old girl, no matter what. And it sounds absolutely baffling to think that a whole community didn't understand that it was wrong, but that's because of the failings from the services and that then being passed on to the wider community. So there is a real issue with having to educate. There's been a big shift in public opinion over the last few years. The more people heard the stories about what the men actually did to us, because when the services referred to it as grooming, it was made to seem less traumatic than it was. It made it seem like they just gave us nice things, but actually there was so much violence involved in it. There was torture. There was the men that abused me also injected 2 girls with heroin and crack cocaine until they were unconscious, and then gang raped them in a bedroom. It wasn't just being bought nice things. It started like that, but it went into a really horrible situation that children would have had no idea how to cope with it, especially the children that was mainly targeted. Not all the victims were from vulnerable homes, but a big majority of them were. So they had no one to safeguard them. They had no one to stick up for them. They had no family members to call these men out. They were alone, and they were children, and they were getting treated like that. And every time they reached out for help, the services told them it was their own fault and they had to go deal with it. And they'd send them back. I had a police officer drop me back off at my abuser's house with 5 men in the house and say to them, "Have fun, boys." Like, it was enabled and facilitated to such a severe level that people forgot what child abuse actually was.
So why do you think it was like this? Why did the police do that?
There was a lot of issues. I think this is what the inquiry needs to expose. I think we all have opinions on what it was, but no one actually knows. I think a lot of it was to do with the big push for multiculturalism and not wanting to have people think that it wasn't working. A lot of it was to do with tensions within the communities anyway. There was a lot of stuff at the time between, like, the Muslim Defence League and the British National Party. So there were a lot of tensions between them anyway, and I think the police wanted to just avoid what were going on by basically, I feel like we got sacrificed for the sake of peace within the community, which isn't right. It should have never have happened. I think there is also a big element of the police didn't think a lot of these girls were worth anything because they were from troubled backgrounds. They were put into children's homes. A lot of them had behavioural issues because of trauma, and there was a lack of trauma-informed work done with them to try and heal what they'd already been through. So because there were behavioural issues and stuff like that, the police just kind of didn't have time for them. They weren't bothered. It was worth ignoring them for the sake of wider peace, if that makes sense.
Do you know anything about the other girls, where they are today?
I gave over 50 girls names to the police at the time. They're all in different positions. Some, sadly, are still in cycles. Some are still actually being abused by these men, because some of the extremely vulnerable ones, once they got to 18, they'd get them addicted to harder drugs, and they'd let them get their own house, and they would use the older females to bring the younger girls to the house to kind of make the younger girls feel reassured. So some of them ended up stuck in that cycle for a long time. I remember getting taken to a house one day, and there were a girl in there, and they brought us there to make us feel more comfortable. And the girl took us into the kitchen, and she said, "Run as quick as you can, run away from these men and never come back," because she was still stuck in that trauma cycle, and she was about 30. She was still being abused by these men. They controlled every part of her life. She wasn't allowed to do anything without their say-so. So some of them, unfortunately, are in similar positions to that. Some of them are married to the men that abused them and have babies and have no way of getting away from them. Some have been to prison. Many have lost their children. None have had any help. Not a single one have had any help. None. Instead, when we started speaking up, we actually started getting targeted again by the services. Like, they tried taking my other children off me and told me that I had to take responsibility for what happened to me. So I stood my ground and I fought, and luckily I got my children back and I won against them. But many of the others are not in a mental state where they can do that, and instead I've ended up losing the kids again. Many are addicted to drugs and have alcohol problems, and a lot of the victims, unfortunately, have ended up dead. So either murdered by the men at the time or dead as a consequence of the drug and alcohol issues they ended up with because of the men getting them addicted to them to control them. And I've ended up dying at 20, 30-year-old. So it's a sad cycle where not many get away and are able to rebuild their lives, which is why we're trying to change that and try and change the direction of people's lives for them.
Is this just as big of a problem today in United Kingdom as it was then?
Yes, because the problem is, because it was ignored for 30, 40 years and allowed to happen, that emboldened them. And it spread throughout, like, their close networks, and it became a huge problem then than what it started with. If the police forces had tackled it at the beginning, it probably wouldn't spread to the epidemic that it is today. But you can still walk down past any school in certain areas of England and see cars full of Asian males praying outside the school waiting for the children to come out. And like, it isn't just the Pakistani men that do it. There is all different ethnicities, but there is a huge disproportion, and they all link back together. So like, my case was linked to 4 other cases in different cities around England with shared perpetrators, and that's just for now. There is probably far more than that, and then each of them cases would have linked to another case. Like, it's not lone opportunists, it's organised networks of criminals that are engaging in gun trafficking, drug trafficking, and the trafficking of children. So it's a huge issue that's going on that hasn't had the right approach to deal with it. And the problem is the government and the police forces have spent so long trying to cover over that there is a disproportion within the Pakistani community rather than dealing with the issue. Like, they intentionally released false data on ethnicities to try and say that it was all white British men doing it when it wasn't. So this is why we've had to keep fighting, because the only reason we need to even know the ethnicities is so we can have a targeted framework that prevents the crime based off of commonalities within perpetrators, or, high-risk areas where it needs targeting. But instead, they've withheld the ethnicity data because they don't want to admit that there is a disproportion, which has stopped us being able to make framework designed to target the right areas and with the right language for them to understand. So there's been a big delay in tackling it.
Thank you so much, Fiona Goddard, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.